It's 10. Okay. We'll go ahead and get started then. Right. Good morning, everyone. So glad you're here today. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate our guests, Crystal Justice and Lata Sharma, who are joining us on the call today. The topic that we're discussing is a heavy one. And for those of you who might have experienced or witnessed abuse, the conversation today could be triggering to you. We want to take care of you. If you need to step away from the webinar, please do so. If you need support and you want to talk to a live advocate, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE or chat live at thehotline.org. Okay, so we are going to be in webinar format again today because we are recording it. Let me start by talking about purse power briefly, and I want to talk about the domestic violence component. Purse Power is working to help women use their massive purchasing power to drive positive change. We believe that if women who make 80% of all purchasing decisions would choose to buy from the companies that actively promote women, and we would do it in mass, and if we could create a funding stream for battered women's shelters in the process, that we could shatter glass ceilings and change lives. So a big part of Purse Power's DNA is about making a difference around domestic violence. The purpose of the calls, we're trying to connect you with each other. We're trying to connect you with national leaders. And today we're trying to give you some really, really important information for both you, your friends, your family, and your daughters and selves. All right. So if you would please go ahead and share your comments via chat. Be sure, just like every week, to capture your questions, and we'll do a Q&A a little later on. All right. So before we start, I wanted to go ahead and introduce Lata Sharma. And Lata, thank you so much for sponsoring the program today and for being here today. You're amazing. Delighted to have you. She is the founder of ImSafeNow, which is a wonderful panic button for women in dangerous situations. We've been trying to find somebody like Lata from the very beginning. This is something that we wanted to do. How can we be proactive to help women who are in dangerous situations? And you've got a solution. I'll give you a minute to talk about that here. Lata, in addition to having this new product she's going to be talking to you about, is also a highly successful entrepreneur and product designer. She has lived your lives as an entrepreneur, and she's got a lot of insight to share. So Lata, let me hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Donna, for that fantastic introduction. So hello, everybody. My name is Lata Sharma, founder of ImSafeNow. We are extremely passionate about empowering women and children for their own physical and emotional safety. This year has been so challenging for all of us in so many ways. So if you're really thinking of giving a gift, why not give a gift of safety to yourself and to your family? I would love it if you guys check out my website, www.imsafenow.com. But most importantly, I'm so excited to be actually introducing Crystal Justice, who is Chief External Affairs Officer for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Crystal provides communication and fundraising leadership for the only 24/7, 365 days hotline in the nation, serving victims and survivors via call, chat, and text, linking them to nearly 5,000 shelters and domestic violence programs across the United States, Puerto Rico, Guam, and US Virgin Islands. The organization has answered 5.5 million calls since their founding in 1996. Crystal has spent her entire 18-year career serving nonprofit organizations focused on public health and social justice. She's certified in nonprofit executive leadership through the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and is a graduate of Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio. She's passionate about changing the outcomes for those affected by abuse by reducing stigma around this extremely pervasive issue and encouraging people to reach out for support. Crystal resides in Austin, Texas with her husband, Wayne Justice. Crystal?
Thank you, Lata. Thank you for that also kind introduction and for the incredible work that you're doing. I am so delighted to have you sponsor today's session and to meet you through this process. Always wonderful to meet a fellow warrior on behalf of women. Hi, Donna.
Hi there. Absolutely. This is going to be a fantastic call. I'm delighted, and it's a super important one. So to start, how did you come to the national hotline? Give us a little background on you and your life and your career.
Sure. Happy to share a little bit more about me, and greetings to the First Power community. I'm so glad to be joining this webinar today, whether you're viewing it live or viewing a recording later. So I've had a non-traditional path, both in my career and in my education. I left home at a very early age because of a family situation that I really needed to leave. And so I started my career in nonprofit work just by chance at the ripe age of 19 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I've never left. I just fell in love with the thought of how I could be part of an organization's mission to make people's lives better. And I've really focused on organizations that were serving marginalized communities, communities that were underserved, really focused on social well-being and health. Prior to joining the hotline team, I spent 7 years in the women's reproductive health and justice space. I'm originally from Ohio, as Lata alluded to in my background. But then the hotline came calling, and it meant a move to Texas, which was unique. I wasn't sure if feminists were going to be allowed into Texas, but it turns out they are. And so the hotline was really kind of a culmination of my career experience to date and my personal passion when it comes to the issue. And it just felt like the right moment for me. And so we moved to Texas in 2019, and I joined the hotline team. And it's really been an incredible experience coming up on nearly 2 years.
Wow. It's great waking up every day and doing something that really matters.
Absolutely. And you know, as I talk about the hotlines work, certainly we have those on our team who are truly on the front lines 24/7. And the role that my team gets to play is making sure that the resources are there, that the communications and marketing are there, so that we can continue to do this work, and that those who need our services are aware that we're here for them. It's incredibly powerful to work for an organization that for nearly 25 years has never closed its doors or shut off its phones for an hour. You know,
wow.
we have been on 24/7 since our inception in 1996.
I'm really, really glad you're there. I wish you didn't need to be, but
yeah, we do too.
Okay, so tell us about the hotline. How many calls do you take a day? Where do they come from? What happens when somebody calls you?
Yeah, well, the hotline has a very interesting history. So the Violence Against Women's Act passed Congress in 1994. And it was a mandate of that act that a National Domestic Violence Hotline be formed. And that was a competitive process. And there was an organization in Texas who applied to have the first National Domestic Violence Hotline. And so that is how the hotline came to be headquartered in Austin, Texas. We took our first call in February 1996, and we served the entire United States and its territories. And as Lata said, to date, we've answered over 5.5 million calls, chats, and texts. We serve a few populations. So certainly those who are directly affected by the abuse, and we refer to those individuals as survivors. We are very passionate at our organization to not use the term victim, because we believe anybody in an abusive situation is surviving that abusive situation, and we need to honor their strength, their courage, and their bravery in that. So in my presentation today and in what we share, I'll be talking about survivors. We also serve a large population of friends and family members, those who have a survivor in their life and want to know how to support them. What can they do in this situation? And then we also do have abusive partners who reach out for support. Many times they don't recognize that their behavior is abusive. So it's interesting that we might receive a call where someone actually thinks that they're the one being abused, and our well-trained live advocates are actually able in the interaction to identify that they are in fact the abusive partner and start to intervene with them as potentially the abusive partner. On average, the hotline receives an astounding 1,500 to 1,800 contacts a day. And when I say contact, I mean a phone call, a digital chat via our website, or a text message. All of our services are provided by live advocates, so you're always interacting with a human being when you reach out to the hotline. We serve everyone anonymously and confidentially. This is really important, particularly for those who are living in rural communities or where their abusive partner might be a well-known individual in the community or carry a certain status in the community. They need to be able to talk about their situation without fear of judgment and without fear of really having any consequences to them telling their story and needing support. So I said that we receive 1,500 to 1,800 contacts a day. We answer anywhere between 800 and 1,000. So it doesn't necessarily mean that hundreds of people aren't getting served. Because we serve anonymously, people could be exiting the queue, calling back, texting back later. But it is a window into, there is a higher demand for our services than our organization is able to meet. And that really is an example of how pervasive this issue is. Because we know for everyone who's reaching out to the hotline, there are thousands, if not millions, who don't reach out to the hotline or may not be reaching out to local providers. And 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will be abused by an intimate partner in their lifetime. That is a staggering and unacceptable statistic. And we view domestic violence as a public health crisis, just as we view this pandemic as a public health crisis. And we need to, as a society, respond to this issue with the seriousness and the resources that we're responding to something like a pandemic.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm sure in this time of COVID, I understand that domestic violence calls have increased and that there's some new kinds of calls you're getting around.
Yeah. Donna, thank you for raising it. Just to give a little bit of context, the hotline had a history of whenever there was a natural disaster, such as a hurricane or a flood or a tornado or a wildfire, in the areas that were affected by that natural disaster, we would see that those who were impacted by abuse were at a higher risk because of the stress and isolation that those situations were causing. So early on in February, when we were all learning about this pandemic and really understanding how widespread it could be, we braced as an organization for the fact, for the first time in our history, we could have something that was affecting the entire country at the exact same time. Mm-hmm. And we know that any situation that adds stress and financial strain and isolation increases a survivor's risk for abuse. And this pandemic has elements of all three, not to mention the elements of mandated sheltering in place, which effectively meant that many survivors across the country were going to be sheltering in place with their abusive partners. And we can talk a little bit about examples of how that's played out. So our organization went to work on how do we become pandemic ready. Number one, from the standpoint of, the majority of our staff is housed in a building in Austin, Texas. So how do we protect our team and protect continuity of services? So thanks to support from the Allstate Foundation and many other corporate foundations, we moved our entire team, it was more than 180 people, to remote work in 3 days. Wow. We've never done that as an organization.
Wow.
It was an incredible victory, and it was just awe-inspiring to see our teams working around the clock to make that transition happen. We never lost a moment of serving survivors in that transition. So we're exceptionally proud of that and grateful for support.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But then we went to work on what are survivors going to need in this environment. And so our advocates had to become experts in the pandemic itself, because we knew that an abusive partner will really use anything, any tool in their toolbox to further isolate and exert power and control, even a pandemic. And so one of the things that our advocates have had to be in the midst of this crisis is experts on the pandemic itself, so they can correct misinformation. Misinformation about the virus, misinformation about what sheltering in place really means, misinformation about the mandates. And of course, that's complicated because each state is handling these mandates very differently. And so not only do we need to become experts on a national scale, but depending on where our callers were from, we really had to know what was happening in those states with lockdowns. And then we knew that with a good number of survivors being forced to shelter in place with their abusive partners, we were going to have to learn how to safety plan in that environment. And so that's one of the core services of our organization. When someone reaches out to the hotline, they're reaching out to a live advocate and they're receiving, number one, validation of their experience, support without judgment, personalized safety planning for the moment and for where they hope to be in the future as far as safety is concerned, and connection to resources in their local community. So our advocates and our training team really had to go to work at how do we safety plan people in their home 24/7 with their abusive partner. Wow. In a situation particularly where, you know, for those who haven't experienced abuse, even if you're living with your abusive partner, going to school, going to work, going to church, going out with friends, it is the opportunity for the survivor to get a break from the experience. It also, time away from an abusive partner and just being distant creates a situation where there's less time for events to occur or for escalation to occur. Now you have everyone together 24/7, and that safety planning was really, you know, it depended on the situation, but it could be take a little bit longer in the shower, or it's legal for you to go outside and take a walk. You can go out and take a walk. And then we saw, in really sad instances, abusive partners weaponize the pandemic in that they were keeping those they were abusing away from medical care, away from items we depend on like masks and hand sanitizers, telling their victim that they wanted them to catch COVID-19. And then we saw it swing the opposite direction. People were calling us who, if they coughed or if they sneezed, their abusive partner was locking them in a room or throwing them out of the home. So it really has run the gamut. And nearly 20,000 people who've contacted the hotline since March 16th have cited COVID-19 as a circumstance of their experience, meaning it was either being used by their abusive partner as a means to control them, and or it was creating barriers to resources that they would normally have, like shelter, financial assistance, counseling, etc. And that accounts for about 7 to 8% of our contacts overall. So it is playing a significant role. We've seen our call volume fluctuate, we've seen it go up, we've seen it go down, and it really has kind of moved with the fluctuations of the virus itself, and particularly the mandates that different states have been imposing. And we're bracing again for potential, you know, we saw this morning that there are already states that are considering or enacting lockdowns. So we're bracing again for another situation of where many survivors may be sheltering in place with their abusive partners.
This is really important. I don't know if you can give people like the top 5 things they could do, but if you could share those, I think that'd be useful. So taking longer in the shower, taking a walk.
Yeah, you know, creating a support system for yourself. So it's very important, particularly if someone's viewing this and you're affected by abuse, to know that you're not alone. There are people in your network that are available to support, and there are organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline that are available, and we're here to support you. So I think that for those impacted by the abuse, to reach out as it feels safe to do so to their friends and family members. So for example, if the abusive partner takes a shower at a certain time of day, or you have just a break where you can reach out via text or reach out via a digital format and say, hey, I would like to just have like a virtual get together, or is it okay if I text you? I just want to let you know what's going on in my situation. And for us as friends, families, colleagues, to be part of that support system too, particularly if we know someone is affected by abuse, or we even suspect someone is affected by abuse. So take as much time for yourself as you can. Know the resources that are available to you, whether that be from organizations and or family members. Self-care is essential. Spiritual, mental, physical health, it's very important for survivors. And so we move through, you know, what does it look like for you to do 10, 15 minutes of yoga? What does it look like for you to take a walk? What does it look like for you to even drink more water and just feel a little bit healthier in what you're eating and drinking? It's really important for a survivor to feel in control of their life. And any way that we can safety plan with the survivor so that they feel more in control of what's happening in their day-to-day is going to be empowering for them. And of course, anybody, whether you're the one impacted by the abuse or whether you know someone who is free to reach out to the hotline via phone, via our website, thehotline.org, or via text, and all of our contact information is there.
Okay. All right. So many of us have had colleagues, friends, family that have been impacted or we're concerned about. Can you talk about the signs of domestic violence? Like, what should we be looking for, and what should we do if we suspect it?
Yeah. So the signs are the same, but they look a little bit different in a COVID-19 environment. So as I share these, you might be thinking, well, I don't see this person as often, or I haven't seen them since the onset of the pandemic. So we have to kind of think, how do we watch for signs when we're not in as close physical space as we were pre-pandemic? But the first thing is, as you're communicating with this person in your life, whether it be a friend, a colleague, or a family member, really keep your ears open for anything that concerns you. I think when we talk about abuse, we think about physical abuse. And certainly we look for physical signs of abuse. But that is only one type of abuse. And there are other types of abuse which are more pervasive. And that can look like emotional abuse, which is nearly universal in abusive situations, financial abuse, which is an abusive partner maintaining control over the finances, digital abuse, the use of technology. All of these abuse types are really important. So it doesn't always have to be physical. And it doesn't mean that the severity of these different non-physical forms of abuse are any less. The impact and the danger and the damage that they do as survivor is just as much as anything else. So it's really important to, as you're communicating, keep your ears open. The things to listen for is if your friend or family member is absent more, if they're drawing back, if they're not coming to, dinners or lunches, or they're not communicating with you as much. If you see them pulling back, the strongest tactic an abusive partner will use is isolation. So if you see someone in your life that you've been close to that has showed up in these many ways for periods of time, and all of a sudden they're stepping back, that can be a warning sign, particularly if they're not communicating that with you, right? We all need those breaks in our lives where we say, I'm going to take a few weeks for me. But if you see that pattern of behavior come and they're not talking about it, that can be a concern. If they're making excuses for their partner's behavior. So if they're talking about how their partner might be putting them down, or how their partner might be controlling different aspects of their life, that's a warning sign. But also, if they start to make excuses for that behavior, that's an additional warning sign, right? We often see survivors try to protect their abusive partners because they don't want to be judged, and they don't want their partners to necessarily be judged. So it's really important. Really make sure that you're listening for whether a person's able to make their own decisions. If they say, well, I don't know, I'll have to ask my partner before I agree to that. Or, I can't say that I can do that, but I really need to check with X. Or I can't do that without checking in here. Those are some warning signs. And so when you take all of those warning signs, it's going to be really important to then open up a dialogue with that person and really explore a conversation where they feel safe and comfortable in sharing their experience.
Now, you brought up digital abuse, and that's a new thing. I mean, what does that even look like?
It's new in that the technology is the new aspect. The abuse is not new at all. So, so it goes back to what I said about an abusive partner will use any tool in their toolbox. And we live in a world where technology plays a significant role in almost everything that we do, right? And so when you're an abusive partner, you have now a lot more options to use that technology as a weapon against the person that you're abusing. And it falls into a couple different buckets. The use of technology to control someone. So that can look like, for all these home systems now that we have that control the temperature, the security alarm, the window shades, all of that. So let's say that an abusive partner leaves for work, but they have the ability to control all of that on their phone. So we hear from survivors every day that abusive partners have locked the security system. They are effectively locking their victim in the home, and they are alerted anytime the front door is open, the back door is open, and so they know when someone leaves the home. So now the survivor's in a situation where they don't feel safe leaving home. We've heard of abusive partners adjusting the temperature in the home to make people think that they're this is gaslighting, make people think that they're going crazy, right? Make people think that something's happening, but it's not really happening. So, turning the temperature up in the home, raising the shades, lowering the shades, putting tracking technology on someone's phone so that you know where they are at all times. So the use of the technology itself can be an issue. And then we've also seen the threat of outing someone in a tech world. So, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to take those private pictures of you that I have, and I'm going to share them on Facebook or on Instagram. If you don't do what I say, this is particularly at play in the LGBTQ community, where someone may not be out yet, and yet the partner is threatening to out them publicly if they don't do what the partner wants them to do. So it really is falling into a couple different buckets. In 2019, we saw a 101% increase at the hotline in people who were reporting digital abuse compared to 2018. And honestly, Donna, I think it's been going on for a long time. We're just starting to name it, right? We're just starting, as people call in and talk about their experience, to say, actually, we have a word for that. We describe that as digital abuse. Let's talk a little bit more about it. So I think it's been happening for a long time. And that's why I'm so pleased to see Lata and people like Lata in the tech space step up on behalf of survivors and say, even if the product isn't designed for survivors, given that a significant part of the population in the US is impacted by this issue, we should be considering survivors when we develop technology. And we should be considering how that technology, if weaponized by an abusive partner, could cause harm. If we had more tech companies considering that on the front end of development, instead of on the back end of the product being released, and now they're learning about these things, we could change the outcomes, at least digitally, of what it looks like for a survivor.
Boy, that is so important. We need to help you get that message out. We really do.
Absolutely. And you're doing it today by having Lata on, by Lata sponsoring this. I mean, that's a great start. And I think it also speaks to, Lata, you and I could probably go on for hours about this, women in tech, right? I mean, these are industries which historically have not had representation from women, and particularly have not had representation from women of color. So it is extremely important that there is representation in these industries, because that's when we actually see change in those industries, is when women and women of color have a seat at the table.
Perfect. And Lata, I know you've got some influence, so do something about that, would you? No. All right. So I wanted to ask you, I saw a gal in a store one time that I was really concerned about, but her abuser was right there. The other thing is, you've got colleagues perhaps that you're worried about, and you don't want to embarrass them, but you want to help them. Any insights on those kinds of situations?
Yeah. Well, number one, domestic violence is extremely complex. And we have to remember that as people who are what I would call helpers in a situation, whether that situation be a stranger or whether that situation be someone that we know very well. It's a very complex situation. And sometimes we can, even in our best attempts to help, put a survivor at increased risk or increased danger. So I think we really have to gauge what we have in an interaction that we can use without being too imposing or without putting someone at risk. If it's in like a supermarket environment, or if it's in a environment where you know someone less, the chances to intervene are smaller, for sure. But I do think you can go to the hotline.org and print off some of our materials. You can fold those up and tuck them away in your purse. We do have like brochures and palm cards that we can send out. If there's a discreet way to share even just that with somebody, particularly with a neighbor. I've heard of people just dropping something in someone's mailbox. Don't even know where it came from, just putting it in their mailbox. When you share something, You have to be aware that the abusive partner is probably going to see it. And so you have to do it in a way that it doesn't put somebody at increased harm. So with strangers, that's more difficult, but I would say print off, carry resources. Purse power is the name. We keep a lot in our purses. I think that can be helpful in situations where you don't know the individual. Where you do know the individual, you have a lot more opportunity to support them. And I want to say this really boldly. We have to check our own assumptions about the issue. And we have to take ourselves and our own judgment and our own feelings out. It can be extremely frustrating when someone you love and care about is in an abusive situation, and either A, they don't recognize it, or B, they do, and they're choosing to stay in it for various reasons. I want to say that these are complex issues. These are complex relationships. Just because a relationship is abusive doesn't mean that there aren't parts of that relationship that are good, both for the survivor and for the abusive partner. So those complexities are very difficult to understand. So suspend judgment. That's the most important thing. Suspend complete judgment. Open the door with, if you ever feel like sharing something with me, please know that I'll keep it to myself, but I want to be here to support you. I'm seeing things that concern me. I care about you. Please know that we can have that conversation, and I want you to feel safe. And then follow it up. How can I create a safe place for you to have that conversation with me? That is really important. As they're sharing their experience, if they do, validate it. Know that in that moment, it takes an incredible amount of strength and bravery for them to share it, and say that. Tell them you recognize their strength, you recognize their courage, and that you are just really glad to be there for them. And then the thing that we say at our organization, I don't think we say it officially, we say it unofficially, is don't should all over me. It is human nature to say what we would do in that circumstance. Well, if they treated me like that, I'd be gone in a second. I wouldn't tolerate that for a minute. I'd be out the door. Or I'd let that person know this, and this. The truth of the matter is, when we tell a survivor what they should do, it takes the power away from them even more. We have to trust survivors that they know their situation best. And instead of telling them what they should do, ask the question very simply, what can I do to support you in being safer? Lata, I want to have a million conversations with Lata after this, but safety is a concept, right? We have different understandings of safety. So sometimes it's not safe, sometimes it's safer. How can I play a role in you being safer? Can you set up a text message system for them to say, hey, if I text you this, it means this, and I want you to take these actions on my behalf. Or if you don't hear from me in 2 to 3 days, you should know that something's up. Here's the things that I'd like you to do on my behalf. Or if I do make the decision to leave, here are the things that I will need from you to support me. So asking a survivor how you can support them to be safer is a very powerful question. And sometimes they may not know right away, but after a few days of thinking about it, or after another escalation, where now they're considering, oh, I have a resource in that friend or in that family member, they will come back to you with how you can play a role in their situation.
Well, and the other thing back about making assumptions, I mean, some of the women that I found out later were impacted by this. I never would have guessed it in a million years. Very strong women, senior women, all kinds of women are impacted, right?
Yeah.
Can be anyone.
So the issue is extremely pervasive, given the statistics. It happens to all people, and it is an issue that is often gendered. We often present females as victims, males as abusive partners. The truth of the matter is, people are abused, and people can either be the survivor or they can be the abusive partner. We see it on both sides. Statistically, this disproportionately affects women, and even more so disproportionately affects women of color. 4 in 5 American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. 4 in
Wow.
5.
Wow.
And Black women experience IPV at a rate of 35% higher than white women. So you take these communities who are marginalized, and then they are disproportionately impacted by the issue. And then oftentimes that means is they have limited access to resources when it comes to solutions and opportunities to reach out for support. So this is an issue that is affecting all of this country, but particularly women and communities of color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I used to, I was trained to work in a shelter, and I was on the board of the YWCA. And I know people ask all the time, why do women go back to their abusers?
Yeah, or why don't they leave?
Why don't they leave? Yep.
Why don't they leave? You know, as I said before, these are extremely complex situations, and there is no one size fits all solution. And that's what we need to understand. And the truth of the matter is, first of all, leaving an abusive situation can often be the most dangerous time for a survivor. Because once that abuser gets an inclination that they're leaving or even formulating a plan to leave, then we see things turn violent and even more violent than they had in the past, and oftentimes, not oftentimes, but can turn lethal. So it's very dangerous to leave. The considerations also need to be taken for what factors are there. Is the abusive partner the primary source of funding for the home? Are they the breadwinner? Mm-hmm. Are there children in the home who aren't being abused? We hear many times that abusive partners are abusing their intimate partner, but not abusing children. And we know that it's dangerous. These situations, the children who are observing abuse certainly suffer negative outcomes. But in the survivor's mind, it might be, well, my children are at least safer. What would I do? Access to resources are limited. Shelters are limited. And a shelter environment, as much as it is a safer environment, you know, it's a difficult place if you have children or if you have pets that you love and don't want to leave. And pets are a huge consideration for people. A lot of times that pet is that only source of emotional comfort that that person may have. So that's some reasons why they may not leave. And some reasons why they go back, again, extremely complex, could be all the reasons that they don't leave. Also, let us not forget that an abusive partner is a great manipulator, and they will maintain control by any means necessary. And sometimes that can be threat, violence. Sometimes it can be affection. Sometimes it can be a promise to change, a promise to do better. And for many, I think that it's, again, you know, just because you leave doesn't mean the negative consequences stop. And the trauma that survivors experience physically, mentally, the trauma that they experience is real. And that trauma stays with them, and a recovery has to happen for them. And that's a long journey for a survivor.
Mm-hmm. Boy, somebody talked about post-traumatic stress disorder, and that it was highest among this population, even more so than veterans and others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. All right. So how should we advise our daughters? I've got a daughter who's in college, and believe me, I've tried to warn her about whatever I can understand about what might be happening or who to look for. What are the warning signs that we should tell them about during the dating process?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We as a society have done a fairly decent job at defining abuse, but I don't think we've done a great job at defining healthy relationships. And I think the flip side of an abusive relationship, or even an unhealthy relationship, even if it's not reached the point of being abusive, is a healthy one. And I think that if we want to change the outcomes for the young people that we love in our lives, we need to let them know what a healthy relationship is and that they deserve to have it. Mm-hmm. So in 2007, the hotline started a healthy relationship and prevention program called Love is Respect. So you can go to loveisrespect.org, and it is a place for young individuals, 13 to 26, to get information about dating, abuse, and healthy relationships. And we have to create a narrative about what a healthy relationship is, and that everyone deserves to have a healthy relationship that is free from abuse. When it comes to warning signs, particularly in a digital age where I have two stepdaughters, and my stepdaughters are going to be on their phone most of the time. So I particularly don't have a right to take their phone or to be monitoring their phone use. However, it is interesting to me to ask questions, and this isn't specific to my stepdaughters, but to ask questions of, well, you seem to be texting a lot. Who are you texting? Or, I don't know, there's an intimate relationship if there's a dating partner there. And you're seeing that, oh, well, I just need to let so-and-so know where I am. Or I just need to let so-and-so know that I'm okay. I need to check in. We haven't checked in. It's interesting that in this digital age, we see things like dating partners saying, well, if you care for me and if we're really dating, then you're going to give me the passwords to your social media accounts because I need to check and see who you're messaging, right? And so that's one of the things we've had to really talk about with young people is that's not okay. That's an invasion of privacy. You shouldn't give anyone your passwords to your social media accounts. They don't get that kind of access. They don't get that kind of information. If someone's demanding that you be with them all the time or that you communicate with them all the time, that's a red flag. So look for the red flags, ask the questions, and I would say be vulnerable as a parent. Really, if you're going to have the conversation, loveisrespect.org is a great resource for everyone. But being vulnerable as a parent, just to open the window to that conversation, is going to be really important. And then I would say the strongest thing we can do, particularly as women, is model what it means to have a healthy relationship ourselves. And so I think it's really important to talk about our own relationship experiences, our own dating experiences, and let them know we get it, we understand, we've been there too. I think all of us have those relationships where we look back on them, think, that wasn't too great. Sometimes being vulnerable enough to share that and for them to hear that from their parents are still an extremely strong influence with young people. They're still the strongest influence with young people. They care about what their parents think as much as they may not act like they do. And so sharing that as the parent and being vulnerable, I think, is really important. A lot of these things aren't talked about, right? Relationships aren't talked about. Intimate relationships aren't talked about. Sex isn't discussed. This is really a miss in American society. These things need to be talked about, and they need to be talked about in the home, starting at a very young age with youngsters.
Absolutely. All right, you guys be coming up with your questions. Either put them in chat or the Q&A box. I had a relationship in college that I extricated myself from, and I'm not sure how I understood that it was going down that path because it was early. But do you have any keys to getting out of a relationship like that if they're starting to date? Because they're at risk even at the very beginning if somebody gets too attached, correct?
Even if you're not thinking about getting out of it, even if you're just not sure it's abusive, because sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes it moves so slowly, right? It progresses so slowly that it may turn from healthy to unhealthy to abusive without us even being able to recognize that fully. So I think the first thing is the National Domestic Violence Hotline and organizations like ours are here to have the conversation. There's no threshold of abuse that you need to be experiencing to call us. Even if you're questioning something that's happening, if it just seems abnormal or it just doesn't seem right, and that's your gut reaction to it, we get that. Call us. Let us have the conversation with you. Let us walk through the experience with you. Let us talk about what we know, and really for you to understand, wow, maybe that was abusive. Maybe that is something that's either a red flag of abuse. So reach out for support, particularly to our organization. It doesn't have to be a one and done. It doesn't have to be you call us and then that's it. Because we might have that conversation and that individual does a couple days of thinking, observes a few more things, and then they've moved to another place in their journey and they're ready to take a next step. We also talk about leaving isn't always the answer. And so how do we support someone who is not going to leave, who for various reasons, and most of the time very good reasons, have made the choice to stay? And so I think for our organization, that's what we're here to support. That's what we're here to walk people through. And I think as friends and family members, we have to mirror that too for the people in our lives. Leaving isn't always the answer. The other thing that I want to talk about really quickly is that as a society, we still lean on law enforcement when these issues are happening, right? Calling 911, calling the police, saying, you know, I think someone's being hurt, I think someone's being abused. We have a lot of data and a lot of narrative that supports that calling the police can actually increase the risk of danger for the survivor for various reasons. And the domestic violence field, the community response to this issue, has long been under-resourced. And there are shelters who are struggling to expand capacity. There are counseling centers who need more resources to be there to support survivors through their journey. There are organizations such as ours where we simply do not have the capacity to answer every call, chat, or text where it comes in. If we want to see an end to this issue as a society, we have to start resourcing the community response to this. And we need to understand that calling law enforcement and calling 911 isn't necessarily the answer. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the first go-to. We really need to think long and hard about how we create a comprehensive response to this issue.
That brings up something else. Bank of America was on our program a couple of weeks ago, Lori Henkel, and they do an excellent job as an employer of supporting their employees that are facing domestic violence issues. They're amazing. What else can employers do to help their employees?
Yeah, you know, statistically recognize that you're employing survivors. That's number one. Understand that we see a lot of corporations still have hesitation to attach their corporate brand to this issue. And yet understand that domestic violence is impacting your staff, your employees, your customer base, your patients, whatever it might be. And so it's really important that as you look through the many ways that you create policies, procedures, that you're considering the unique needs of survivors. And I'll give one example. We had a corporation who reached out because they gave an annual holiday bonus, and they did it by direct deposit. And they couldn't understand why a certain segment of their female staff was asking for a check instead. And they were just stumped. And then we told them it's because that's money that their abusive partner doesn't know about, and they want to put it aside. And that is, so something as convenient as a direct deposit that we require our staff to have could be a barrier for a survivor having resources. And so even having onboarding, ask the question of, is direct deposit a safe option for you?
Oh, that's a good way to ask it.
Is a key question.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly for employees who have voiced that they're experiencing abuse. Really, how are you going to react to that as a corporation, as an HR team, as a people team, particularly if that person feels like they're in immediate danger and yet they have to work. So they're coming to the same office building every day, but they're fearful in doing that. Is there alternate locations that they can work from that their abusive partner may not know? What accommodations can you provide? And this is an issue where corporations should be paying attention. I don't want to lie, but I don't want to give the statistic because I don't have it in front of me, but I will say that I can send it to you, Donna, and you can share it.
Okay.
But the days lost due to domestic violence, the productivity lost is just jaw-dropping.
Astronomical. It is.
Jaw-dropping.
It is.
And so this is not only the right thing to do, but the impact of domestic violence is happening on corporations' bottom line. And not that that should be the only motivation, but certainly when we think about corporations, that should be a consideration too, that this is directly impacting their bottom line. And that's why we're exceptionally proud to have very strong corporate partnership with some very large corporations across the United States, because they've recognized that this is impacting their staff and their customers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nan McKay has a podcast called Trailblazers Impact, and we normally rerun this program on her channel. I'm hoping that's all right with you. There's a whole
Sure,
other
yeah.
group of people that want to see you. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see here. At the end of the day, what do you want the people on this call to have learned from you?
Yeah, I think that number one, if we in this time have let someone listening who may have experienced abuse or is experiencing abuse, if we've let them know they're not alone, and that they're strong and that they're brave, and we see that, and we want to be here to support them. I think that's the most important thing. For those of us who haven't experienced abuse directly, but have people in our lives that we know or suspect have experienced abuse, proactively reach out, particularly during COVID-19. It's okay to just place a phone call or send a text and say, hey, I've been thinking of you. I want to make sure you're doing okay. I know that many of us are feeling more isolated. I just want to let you know you're not alone. If you ever need to talk, just let me know. I think that's extremely important. Keep that dialogue open, let people know. And then the last thing is that anybody can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Even if you're a friend or family member and you're just wondering, should I be concerned? Shouldn't I be concerned? The hotline is here for you. And we want to be a resource for everyone.
Absolutely. It's interesting. A friend of mine on Facebook wrote a note to everyone saying, guys, if you're hungry, let me know. I won't let anyone know. I will get you some food. Right. I mean, that's the other thing is if there's a way to get out there that I'm a support system for you. I really do want to help you if you're in this situation.
And Donna, I'm so glad you brought up social media, because if you don't follow the hotline.org, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Just resharing our stuff, just resharing what we're posting with your network, not even adding to it, just reshare it. You never know out of your friends and contacts on social media who might need to see that information. And you never know that, you know, every time we talk about this issue, every time we share something about this issue, we are breaking down stigma, right? And we need to break down the stigma. This is not a private family matter. This is a public health crisis affecting millions of Americans, and we need to be talking about it. And anytime that we take a personal investment in that and we start talking about it, and we've seen this from the Me Too movement, it can become a wave of change. And we need a wave of change as far as this issue is concerned.
I think your point is well taken. Do people do it because not talk about it because they're embarrassed? And we need to make it okay to talk about it. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. All right. Okay. Do you have any final words of wisdom to share with us, unless anybody else has any questions?
I think I'm just really grateful for this opportunity. Donna, thank you for all the incredible work that you're doing with Purse Power, to have an organization that's led by women, that is looking to make women's lives better in so many different ways. We're incredibly grateful. And Donna, for the support that you've given the hotline over the years, we're incredibly grateful. Same to you, Lata. I think we could have like 6 conversations just after what I've mentioned today. And then to the Purse Power community, you know, thank you so much for the dedication to making the world a better place. And the thing that I want to say kind of in closing is this is an issue with a lot of hope and a lot of strength. And there is a journey and there is a path for people to be safer and ultimately to have lives that are free from violence. So this is an issue that we can turn. And there are many people and organizations who are doing incredible work. And we'd love for you to join us. It would be great to have support from the Purse Power community, but also it just support those in your networks directly who might be impacted by relationship abuse.
Outstanding. Thank you. You've been wonderful and amazing, and deeply appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Okay. Lata, I want to give you a chance. We've got a couple more minutes. I want to give you a chance to talk about what exactly ImSafeNow is doing. What is what you're selling, the technology?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Like Crystal just spoke about, like, you know, we need to be empathetic, right? And what we want to do from an ImSafe standpoint is create that safe community. So it's not just about, you know, giving a button or something like that, but actually forming that safe environment for anybody to kind of reach out to. So it is, hardware. Yes, there is a panic button. So if you're really in trouble, you can press the button and reach out to your network. But it's all about also the emotional support. And I think that's where many things may start. Like, somebody reaches out and says, I'm not, not feeling good or whatever. So there is that whole emotional support aspect to the I Am Safe Now. So it is a complete, what we call it as a complete solution. So it's a physical safety if you're really feeling that, and emotional support for the after trauma. So we will have a network of certified counselors. Like Crystal said, they are inundated with calls, and something like I'm Safe Now could be that huge support for women all over.
And you're actually aiming at women all over the world, aren't you?
Exactly, because as we all know, it's not specific to a society or anything like that. We have seen it as varying in all socioeconomic strata of our society and globally. So we are looking at this from a global perspective.
Wow. And Crystal, just quickly, is the national hotline just for the U.S. or do you take calls from out of the country?
We are just for the United States and its territories, but we do have counterparts in other countries. So the UK has its own domestic violence hotline. I believe Australia, Canada, and New Zealand have their own hotlines. So there are varying resources across the world. And there are also cultural considerations that have to be made in these situations. And I want to talk about Strong Hearts, which we, the National Domestic Violence, worked with a community to start Strong Hearts, which is the Native Women's Helpline in the United States. And now they are on their way to being their own independent organization, and we're so glad for them. So not only in the world, as Lata said, but there are culturally specific organizations serving communities affected by this issue who are doing incredible work with the full view of the survivor in mind, including the cultural specific considerations that need to be made.
That was a really important point. Very good. Thank you. Okay, guys, I think we need to bring it to a close here. So I want to thank you once again for being our guests.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad to have you here. And then I just want to let you know, on November 20th, we're going to have Annette Koslowski talk about 2020 Women on Boards. If you're not aware of that organization, they are trying to get more women on board positions. And there's a whole group of activities that's going on nationwide. This has been going on for 20 years. This is their 20th anniversary. She'll be letting everyone know about that. And then Soumya Sridhar is a VC and family office expert. She'll be talking to us about partnering with those organizations. And Victoria Woods with Chapelwood Financial will be sponsoring that program. Please sign up for directory listing if you haven't done so already. So if your company has either a female CEO or president, or it's half owned by women, or you have at least 20% women on your board, we want you on our directory. Please join us. And you can get a free extension, or you can upgrade and add a bunch of bells and whistles. Please download our Google Chrome extension on your Google Chrome browser. As you shop online, it will show you which companies are women-owned or women-led. And again, we're trying to help you know who to buy from as you're making your buying decisions. Please use your Purse Power directory to buy from women-owned and women-led companies. And please like and share our social media pages, as well as those of I'm Safe Now and of the National Hotline. Let's really get out there and get this message out there. Please let your friends know about our webcast. It goes on every Friday at 10 Central. And any other final parting comments?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It was great to be with you guys today. Thank you so much.
Great to have you here. All right. Please remember, Purse Power, we have it. Let's use it. Take care, you guys. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.